welcome to the deep dive. So today, we're going to shift focus a bit. We're moving away, really, from that typical image.
Yeah, the almost stereotyped criminal psychopath, right? Locked away somewhere.
Exactly. That whole idea, we're landing somewhere much, much closer to home, romantic relationships. We're looking at psychopathic traits as they actually exist out in the general population.
And that's such a crucial shift, you know? For decades, research was pretty much confined to prisons, forensic settings. But the way we understand it now, well, view psychopathy as more of a dimensional thing, a personality construct.
Meaning it's not just an on-off switch.
Precisely. Not on or off. It's a spectrum. There's key components like being really manipulative, callous, not feeling emotions deeply, being very self-centered.
Right.
These are traits that exist in varying degrees in, well, everyday people. This includes what some folks call successful psychopaths.
The ones who seem to function well.
Yeah, people who use that superficial charm, maybe some strategic manipulation to kind of thrive socially, maybe at work, and definitely in their dating lives.
Okay, that immediately raises the stakes, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So our mission in this deep dive, and this is really tailored for you listening, is to dissect this really interesting study. It looks specifically at how these non-clinical traits are perceived by the partner who isn't psychopathic. And crucially, whether that perception connects to actual measurable risks specifically, things like stalking victimization. We really want to understand what that lived experience is like.
And getting that partner's perspective is just invaluable. Because if these traits exist on a spectrum out in the community, well, the sharpest effects, the real impact, is going to be felt by the people closest to them, their partners, often.
So, okay, these traits might be everywhere to some degree. Why zoom in on the romantic context specifically?
Because relationships are kind of the perfect laboratory for these traits to really play out. When you expect emotional intimacy, that deep connection, the fundamental emotional detachment you see in someone with high psychopathic traits, it becomes immediately obvious and often quite destructive. Their whole motivation for even being in the relationship is often different. It can be very transactional.
Transactional, not about connection then.
Exactly. They're often not looking for that deep emotional commitment, that effective bond. They might pursue relationships for what they can get out of it.
Like what?
Oh, things like status, maybe power, sexual access is a big one, sometimes financial gain, or, and this is really key, a sort of deep-seated need for control over the other person. Empathy isn't really there in the way we'd expect, so the partner can end up being treated more like a resource.
Wow. And we already know from other research, don't we, that there are specific risk behaviors linked to these traits, things like infidelity, sexual coercion, even intimate partner violence.
Absolutely. Those links are pretty well established. And importantly, the problematic behavior doesn't just stop if the relationship ends. There's a known connection between these traits and really intense post-breakup stuff like stalking. It's often seen as a way to kind of reassert control, keep tabs on the ex-partner, or satisfy this like perceived sense of ownership.
What I found really compelling about this study we're focusing on today is that it zeroed in only on the risk indicators as reported by the partner from their perspective in the general community, which gives it, what, ecological validity? Is that the term?
Exactly. It means it's reflecting how these relationship dynamics are actually seen and felt in the real world, you know, outside of a clinic or a prison.
Okay, so how did they go about mapping these real-world dynamics? What was the setup?
So the researchers used what's called a mixed methods approach. It was a correlational study design. They got 78 participants from the community. So again, not a clinical group, just regular people who were either currently in a romantic relationship or had recently been in one. And these participants answered questions about their own personality and then about their partner's perceived traits and any associated risks.
Okay, let's get into the specifics of the toolkit then. For 78 people, how did they measure all the personality, the risk?
They used some well-validated psychological tools. For the participants' own personality, they used the standard Big Five model, you know, openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism.
Standard stuff.
Yeah, and also the short dark triad scale, the SD3.
Ah, the dark triad.
Yeah.
That's Machiavellianism, narcissism, and psychopathy, right? They often get grouped together.
They do, because they all share this kind of manipulative, maybe emotionally cold core, but they are distinct.
How so?
Well, very basically, narcissism is more about grandiosity, needing admiration, entitlement. Machiavellianism is characterized by being cynical, strategically exploitative, manipulative, and psychopathy really stands out for its high impulsivity and that profound callousness, lack of remorse.
Gotcha.
So understanding where the participants scored on the dark triad was actually pretty important for interpreting how they saw their partner.
Okay, and then for measuring the perceived risk from the partner, what did they use there?
For that, they used the VSDAS 2009. That stands for the Risk Identification Checklist for Stalking Cases.
The VSDASH. Okay.
Yeah, it's a practical tool. It's basically a set of 11 yes-no questions. Pretty straightforward, designed to capture the participants' actual experiences of stalking behaviors from their partner.
Okay.
It helps put a number on that risk level.
Now, before we dive into the actual findings, the numbers, you mentioned something important about the methodology, about the sample size.
Yes, absolutely. And the researchers were very upfront about this. While 78 participants were enough to do some initial sort of exploratory analysis, the study was technically underpowered if you wanted to reliably detect smaller or maybe medium-sized effects, especially in their more complex regression models.
So what does underpowered mean for us, practically speaking, when we look at their results?
It means we need to be a bit cautious, especially with the null findings, the things they didn't find a statistically significant link for. It doesn't automatically mean there's no link in the real world. It might just mean their sample wasn't big enough to pick up on a more subtle connection that could exist in the broader population. So we can be fairly confident about the significant findings they did get, but we should take the non-significant ones with a grain of salt.
Right. Duly noted.
Huh?
Okay, so let's move into the findings themselves. One of the really intellectually interesting correlations they found had to do with that dark triad makeup you mentioned. They found a significant link where participants who scored higher themselves on Machiavellianism were also more likely to rate their partners as having higher levels of psychopathic traits.
Yes, and this is fascinating because, like the study authors point out, it kind of leads you down two possible paths of explanation.
Okay, what are they?
Well, the first one, let's call it interpretation A, fits with this idea of assortative mating, basically like attracts like, meaning people who have certain traits themselves, maybe cynical, manipulative traits like high Machiavellianism might consciously or unconsciously just seek out partners who are similar. Partners who also score higher on dark triad traits like psychopathy. You kind of gravitate towards what you know or what feels familiar.
So high manipulators might attract other high manipulators, or at least people with related traits.
Potentially, that's one possibility, but interpretation B is quite different and maybe more subtle.
Okay.
Interpretation B suggests it's not necessarily about who they choose, but about how they perceive the partner they're with. The participant's own high Machiavellianism acts like a filter.
A filter. How?
Well, someone high in Machiavellianism already tends to be pretty cynical, distrustful, right? They might expect the worst from people. So this interpretation suggests they might just be more prone to seeing or interpreting their partner's behavior, even maybe neutral or ambiguous behavior, as being intentionally manipulative or callous. Even if someone without that Machiavellian lens wouldn't see it that way at all.
Wow. Okay, that's a huge difference. Because one interpretation is about who you choose, the other is about how your own personality colors your perception of whoever you're with.
Exactly. And the study design couldn't definitively tease those two apart. Was it attraction or was it perception? We don't know for sure from this data.
But just finding the connection between the participants' Machiavellianism and their perception of the partner's psychopathy is pretty powerful in itself.
It absolutely is. And moving beyond that ambiguity, the study did provide some strong confirmation for its main hypothesis, which was about that link between perceived psychopathy and actual behavioral risk.
Okay, what did they find there?
They found that higher perceived partner psychopathy. So when participants rated their partners higher on those traits, it was associated with a statistically significant increase in their stalking victimization risk scores based on that VSDS checklist.
So the perception of the trait really did line up with reported experiences of risky behavior.
Yes. The perceptions seemed to map onto the reality of the risk, at least as measured by that tool.
But here's where things got really interesting, right? The data threw a bit of a curveball. Something that seems to challenge what a lot of previous research suggests.
It did, yes. A genuinely surprising finding.
They found no statistically significant difference in those stalking victimization scores based on the gender of the partner being rated.
That's right. Whether the participant was reporting on a male partner or a female partner, the level of perceived stalking risk didn't significantly differ, statistically speaking.
And why is that so surprising?
Well, there's a pretty large body of research out there suggesting that psychopathy, particularly the aspects linked to aggression, rule breaking, and risk, tends to be significantly more common, or at least more diagnosed, in men.
Right.
So the fact that in this community sample, the perceived risk and the resulting victimization scores were similar, regardless of whether the partner was male or female, well, it definitely challenges some assumptions about how these traits manifest in relationships across genders.
Any thoughts on why that might be the case here in this kind of sample?
It's hard to say for sure from just this study, but it does raise questions. Maybe psychopathic traits in women, while perhaps expressed a bit differently sometimes than in men, maybe less overt physical aggression, more relational or emotional manipulation perhaps, are still equally effective, unfortunately, in creating these really damaging high-risk relationship dynamics for their partners. It could suggest that if the core traits are there, the callousness, the need for control, the potential for harm, including post-breakup control tactics like stalking, might be similarly high regardless of the partner's gender.
Definitely sounds like something needing more research.
Absolutely. It warrants a lot more exploration.
Okay, so the quantitative data gave us those connections with the personality links, the scores. But the study was mixed methods. Let's talk about the qualitative side now, which really brings the human experience, the human cost, into focus.
Yes, and this is where the mixed methods approach really shines. They did a thematic analysis. They looked closely at the answers participants gave to one open-ended question.
Which was,
in your own words, please explain the effect that the experience of being in this relationship has had on you.
simple question, but likely powerful answers.
Incredibly powerful. And analyzing those answers allowed them to identify three main themes that really captured the whole spectrum of experiences, often aligning with how much psychopathy they seem to perceive in their partner.
Okay, what was the first theme?
Theme one was labeled positive relationship effects. And this was, as you'd expect, mostly found in relationships where the partner was likely perceived as having low psychopathic traits.
So the healthy baseline.
Pretty much. Characterized by sub-themes like feeling safe and secure. You had quotes like, he made me feel very safe, comfortable, and loved. And also positive mental health, like someone saying the relationship was completely positive towards me and my mental health, sets the stage for what's missing when the traits are present.
Right. Then there was theme two.
Theme two was mixed relationship effects. This captured that gray area, the more ambivalent experiences. These were people who often acknowledged good things, maybe good intentions in their partner, but also described really challenging, draining dynamics, perhaps where the traits were present, but maybe not at an extreme level.
You have an example.
Yeah, one quote really summed it up. Predominantly good, he's a good man, but sometimes when stressed, pushes everyone away and doesn't deal with things. You see that struggle. Navigating inconsistency, perhaps emotional unavailability, but maybe not outright exploitation.
Okay. And that brings us to theme three, which I imagine aligns more closely with those high-risk scores we talked about.
Exactly. Theme three was negative relationship effects. And these were the accounts that really detailed long-term emotional psychological harm, typically in relationships where high psychopathic traits were likely perceived by the participant.
This is where the damage really shows up in their own words.
Absolutely. And within this theme, they identified several destructive sub-themes. The first was a really profound impact on self-worth, labeled low confidence self-esteem.
And the quotes must have been tough to read there.
They really were. They're stark reminders of the impact of that kind of manipulation. One person wrote, "It left me with little to no self-esteem. I felt as though I wasn't good enough for anyone because that's what I was told repeatedly."
Wow. That's emotional abuse, plain and simple.
Yeah.
It's designed to keep someone down.
It really is. And that internal damage, that erosion of self-worth, it didn't just stay internal, it had lasting effects on their ability to connect with others, which led to the second sub-theme, deep trust commitment issues.
So the relationship ends, but the fallout continues.
For a long time, often, participants talked about things like lingering trust issues, a lot of insecurities, triggers, lack of confidence when it comes to future relationships. The damage ripples outwards.
And in some cases, it went even further, right?
Yeah.
Affecting their entire view of relationships.
Yes, the final subtheme under negative effects was negative views on relationships overall. For some, the experience was so toxic, so damaging, it fundamentally soured their view of potential partners, sometimes generalizing unfairly.
You mean
Like quotes revealing really deep distrust, such as, "It has made me distrusting of males." Or even more extremely, someone saying the relationship made me hate the majority of men. It shows the immense psychological burden these experiences can leave behind.
So putting it all together, the numbers and the stories,
Yeah.
what's the big picture here?
I think the real power is in how the findings converge. The study used two very different ways of looking at the situation, those quantitative risk scores from the VSDAH and the deep qualitative themes from people's own words about the impact on them.
Mm-hmm.
And they pointed in the same direction. Higher perceived partner psychopathy lined up with both higher scores on the behavioral risk checklist and with these accounts of really significant, meaningful, emotional, and psychological harm.
So the final takeaway for you listening to this deep dive is really about the importance of this kind of research, isn't it?
I think so.
It really validates shifting the conversation about psychopathy out of just the prisons and clinics and into the community, into everyday life. It shows there's real value in measuring these individual personality traits and, maybe most importantly, truly listening to the experiences of people who might be victims right here in ordinary settings, because the harm is just as real.
Absolutely. And if we circle back just for a moment to that really interesting, maybe slightly unsettling ambiguity we discussed earlier.
The Machiavellianism finding,
Yeah,
where HIMAC participants saw more psychopathy in partners.
exactly. The fact that participants high in Machiavellianism were more likely to perceive psychopathic traits in their partner, and the data couldn't tell us if that's because they attract that kind of partner or if their own cynicism makes them perceive it more readily. Well, here's a final thought, something for you to maybe chew on. Given that uncertainty, what does it potentially mean if your own internal wiring, your own level of cynicism, maybe your own trust patterns could be acting as the main filter, shaping how dangerous or toxic you perceive the relationships you choose or find yourself in?